to my podcast on real relationships. My name is Sophie Passon and I am a relationship expert, international speaker and best-selling author. I have decided to start this podcast because, in my opinion, relationships are currently not being portrayed as what they really are. Whether you're watching the news or on social media, the perception it is giving people is, in my view, wrong. And my aim is to talk about what really happens in the real world and talk about real story and what real people do or go through, as opposed to creating expectations of something that actually doesn't exist. So here today we have Nikki, who is going to talk to us about what it is to have a successful marriage. So hi Nikki, how are you?
Hi Sophie, I'm really well, thanks. How about you?
Yeah, not bad, thank you. Apart from rocking myself out, as we just said, but never mind. So can you, for the benefit of everybody else, tell me a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. So my name's Nikki. I'm the mum of two. I live in Hampshire in the UK. I'm married to Mike. We've been married for 9 years. We're 10 years next September. Mm-hmm. And we have a cat called Smokey, as well as our two girls. We're very fortunate that Mike works very hard to support us, which enables me to be pretty free to kind of follow my dreams, really, in pursuing my own career, working for myself. So that's kind of us, really.
Fair enough. So tell me about how you met him.
Well, Mike and I actually went to university at the same time. So we both started at the same time in the same city. Yeah. And I lived in the university halls of residence and he stayed at home living with his parents, and he'd chosen a uni near to home. And we often went on nights out, as you do when you're at uni. And one particular night we went out with our flatmates, and one of our flatmates was actually on the same course as Mike. And while we were out for the evening, Mike and his course mates had all gone out together. And so we basically had a mutual friend without knowing it.
Fair enough.
And I walked into this bar. It was a very, very busy bar. And it was ridiculous. It was one of those strange moments that just felt completely ordained. I walked into the bar. It was absolutely packed. And in the middle of this bar, there was a raised podium where the actual bar was. And it was sort of a square. And it was serving on all four sides. And as I walked in, Mike was stood at the bar. And he's so tall, he was literally head and shoulders above everybody else. And the lights, the way the lighting was in that place, all the lights came down onto the podium and the rest was quite dark. And I just saw him and it was like,
literally standing out.
He really stood out to me. So I saw him, but I wasn't the kind of girl I didn't have the confidence to go and just talk to him. So the evening went on and I kind of was watching him a little bit from afar. And then I noticed that this guy in our party had gone up to him and started talking. And so when that guy came back to our group, I said, "Do you know that guy over there?" And he said, "Oh yeah, that's Tapley, he's on our course." And when he said that, I realised that there was an opening. So I said to him, "Would you be able to introduce us later on?" And the rest, as you say, was history.
Yes. So would you say it's quite a traditional journey? Because, you know, for some people, you know, they're still single when they're 30 or 40, or they go through a lot of frogs before finding the Prince Charming. And so would you say it was quite a traditional journey?
Traditional in the sense that, yeah, I don't think there was anything particularly crazy about the way that our relationship happened. It developed. It was kind of traditional the way that it happened. Yeah. I'd had some relationships beforehand. Yeah. He hadn't really had a serious relationship before me, so I was his first serious relationship, which I guess may be a little bit unusual. But because we were both relatively young, I mean, he was only really just 18 when we met. Yeah. And I was 19 nearly, so we were both pretty young. But the one thing that I'd say was quite different about our relationship was that my husband in particular was very keen to be sure that it was a relationship he wanted to stay in. I think because we were both so young, and he realised that to get into a relationship at that point might impact quite significantly on his future.
His life. Yeah.
So, and I'd had some bad experiences and I didn't want to mess around. I kind of either wanted a relationship or I didn't. I didn't want to be messed about.
No in between.
No, and so quite early on, after we'd met, it kind of felt quite serious. And a couple of months in, he had a bit of a moment where I was actually away skiing. It was Valentine's Day, and I'd sent him a message to say Happy Valentine's Day, missing you. And he didn't reply, and I thought it was a bit odd. So I messaged him again and said, are you okay? And he basically said, I need a bit of space. Can we not talk until you get back? And I was a bit freaked out by all of that. So I thought that was it. I thought we were done for. It was a very new relationship. But when I got back, we met up, and he actually explained that he was feeling that he needed to clarify for himself if this was the relationship that he wanted to stay in for good, or if he should.
It's actually quite common. Men and women fall in love in different ways. And the man actually falls in lust first, despite the fact they might think it is love. But they kind of need to feel that the woman loves them before they can properly go for it, if that makes sense. It's obviously all unconscious, so he would not have known he was doing that. But it is very common for people to get cold feet quite early on, or, right at the beginning, shall we say, for that exact reason. So
how interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't have known, but that does kind of make sense because the relationship had become quite serious quite quickly.
Yeah.
So that probably would be the point at which, if you weren't really sure about something, you'd want to get out.
Yeah. And it's that. It's just because also as a man, they can also be sometimes a bit scared of feelings when they're very strong, because we're quite emotional, but they're not necessarily that way until they meet someone special, shall we say. And it's something that actually happens more than we think. It's just that people don't normally talk about it, you see. So.
Yeah, and I guess as well, at that age, 18, 19-year-old guy, not really had a serious relationship, kind of still living at home, emotionally, he's probably quite immature, and the emotional intelligence, you have a certain amount of emotional intelligence, but you're still developing that. So I think as well, there's that, not being able to understand your feelings and not being sure of it. And actually the thing that I felt was quite unusual about our relationship in all of this was, for a young man of 18, 19, he was incredibly in tune with what he wanted for his future and with his feelings, enough to actually have that conversation and to work it through, rather than just to panic at those feelings and run a mile, which I think other guys of his age were doing in their relationships. So I felt that he was quite special in that respect.
I think it does depend on, sometimes we don't always give them credit for that, to be fair, but it's also the upbringing and a level, he might have been emotionally immature, but a level of maturity within himself, sort of thing. So yeah. Cool. So obviously, like in any relationships, there are always challenging times. So what do you think pulls you through when there's problems?
To be honest, I think it's just the fact that our relationship is always solid.
Yeah.
So when we
then.
Yeah, completely. I mean, we've always been very open and honest about how we're feeling right from that moment.
Yeah.
When we first got together, I've got a faith as well. So from the beginning, I was talking to him about my faith, even though he doesn't share it. And I was kind of explaining why it's important to me. And we would talk about everything for hours and hours and hours. And even though Mike is a man of few words, when it counts, he will always talk to me, and I will always talk to him. And I've kind of always thought that the honesty and the openness that we have in our relationship is what carries us through. And also determination, the determination that we know fundamentally we love each other. So as long as you don't lose sight of that, and you don't get caught up in your own personal kind of emotional issues, and you remember that you love each other, and you love them, they love you, they've made that commitment, that comes first above all else. So you have to put the other things to one side and see that for what it really is and what it means.
Yeah, and I think the other thing as well is the moment where things start to go wrong is normally when people start to not look at life in the same way, when they start to really let's say, for instance, one guy all of a sudden really wants to go out a lot and the other really doesn't, where they probably were in the middle to start off with, and then one goes extreme and the other one goes the other way. And also obviously not talking. A lot of the time people are scared of difficult conversations, but actually it's far harder to not have it. And it's normally I'm not going to say the beginning of the end, but you know what I mean by that, because they then start having the conversation in their own head as opposed to with the other person, assuming that they know what the other person is going to say anyway. So yeah.
I do think as well, a lot of that comes down to the fundamental aspect of trust.
Yes.
In that, actually, if you trust someone enough to be honest with them, they are much more likely to be receptive to what you have to say.
Yeah.
Whereas I think sometimes we, for whatever reason, believe that we can't trust another person. Therefore, we keep our thoughts and our feelings to ourselves. But then when you stop having that openness within the relationship and those lines of communication start to shut down, you run the risk of drifting apart. But not only that, essentially what it's saying is, I don't trust you enough to share these thoughts with you. And if you don't have trust at the bottom, the bottom line of your relationship, then I really don't think you've got a relationship there.
No. And actually, talking of which, because as you said, you were quite young, do you think that some people sometimes marry too young, or shall I say, for the wrong reasons?
Oh, well, I mean, I believe that you should marry on the basis that you are clear that you love one another, that you are clear that you're intending to spend the rest of your earthly lives together, and that you're serious about that. Those are the only two things that you really need. You know, when you say those marriage vows, that is what you should be vowing. So I think, I don't think there's such a thing as getting married too young, provided you understand.
And you're mature enough to understand the implications.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think marriage should be entered into lightheartedly. It should be taken incredibly seriously, not because of the excitement of what it might bring, but actually, you know, when you say for better, for worse, you're meaning for better, for worse, not for better. And if something happens, then later on it's okay because I can divorce you. And of course, nobody enters marriage with that philosophy, but you have to really challenge yourself before you enter marriage and ask yourself, if something were to happen, you know, that would really undermine my trust in that person or whatever, would I really be able to stick to that vow? And I think if you've got a doubt in your mind that you could stick to that vow, then it shouldn't be something you're doing.
Yeah, one of the things I've seen quite a bit is how sometimes people, been together for a while, and they go, "Oh, why don't we get married?" And I just personally don't feel there are marriages that last necessarily, because it's more of a step that they're making happen as opposed to something that they genuinely want to, and as you say, mean and understand the implications of. One of the things I often say is that, and by that I don't mean go and renew your vows and have a big party and spend loads of money, but the vows that you say on that day are easy to a degree, but you should renew them every day. You know, not necessarily like talking to one another, but in yourself, realizing that, you know, it wasn't just that day, it is still today. And a lot of people don't do that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, I think life is so busy and we have so many things to consider that it's not something that's on our agenda and on our radar. And, you know, it's not something that I regularly sit and think, oh, I promised this to him. However, I would say that when things happen, when you hit those bumps in the road, that is when reminding yourself of your vows is really important. Now, I can't honestly say that I've ever had a moment where I've had to stop and think, no, Nikki, you promised. I've never had that, because I've never been driven to that point where I've needed it before. But I know that if something ever did happen, that is where I would go to carry me through. So, yeah, I mean, I think, some people do rush into it and don't take it seriously enough. But I think the other thing is you need to be sure that you really know that person.
Yeah.
You know, you need to really know them, not just, you know, what their favourite colour is. I don't even know what my husband's favourite colour is. Doesn't matter to me. What matters is I know how he's going to react to certain situations. I know what his values are. I know what his view on life is. And, you know, it's that that's more important.
Yeah.
So I think if you haven't been with somebody long enough or spent enough time together, and you might have been with somebody for years but never had those deep and meaningfuls, you need to know them. So it's not about how quickly or how slowly that journey develops. It is more about the quality of the conversation and the communication within that time.
I completely agree with you. And I think that this is where so many people go wrong in that way, because there's so many divorces, you know, there's got to be a reason for them. They don't just happen. And my view is that probably people not so much in the term of like, you know, too quickly or too young, but exactly as you say, or as I've just said, that they go into for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, but I think sometimes what you see in relationships, I don't know if you agree, Sophie, you're the expert here, not me, but it seems to me that there are people who enter into a relationship, and the crucial thing is where you're at when you enter into that relationship. Now, I met Mike at a time where I'd been really badly treated by a couple of guys previously. I had lost trust and faith kind of in relationships. And I spent a few months on my own and just kind of sorting my head out and just steering clear of relationships altogether. And it was at a time when I was actually in myself quite happy being single on my own, in my own space, doing my own thing. And it was at that point that this relationship entered my life. And of the relationships that I've seen out there and people that I've spoken to who've been married longer than I have, the thing that I find really interesting is, you know, we're all fundamentally slightly broken as people. None of us have got it completely sorted. However, I think it's that thing where if you're looking for something from that relationship, if you're looking for a relationship for relationship's sake, because you think it's going to help you solve your problem, then it's destined to fail.
Completely.
I think if you're not content in who you are and sound in who you are, then you're bringing brokenness into someone else's life.
I think that there's a number of things. First of all, you need to deal with the emotional baggage. You know, you cannot just jump from one to the other. And unfortunately, a lot of people do, because they just want to feel better. They want to feel loved. They want to have someone around them. But actually, it's never going to work. They're only creating a bad pattern by doing so, because they're going to start attracting the same kind of like whoever they haven't dealt with. Secondly, if you're not happy single, you want to be happy taken. You know, you can't look to others to sort your life out. You've got to do that yourself. Another human being is only there to complement your life, not to be your life.
Absolutely.
People think that, you know, but once I meet the right person, once I lose weight, once this, once that, everything will fall into place and we'll be perfect. And no, it won't.
No. And I think actually if you start a relationship and you've already got that baggage on, you know, you're carrying that weight already, when you bring that into someone else's life, not only is it going to affect you, but it's also going to affect them.
Yeah.
And it's going to affect your whole relationship dynamic. And like I said, no one's perfect. We all have our own baggage and our own issues that we're constantly working through. Exactly. But I think the fundamental issue is if you're happy being by yourself, quite often it feels inconvenient. Of the friends that I've spoken to that have been married, etc., I think you're at a point where you're actually quite happy being on your own, and then this person kind of quite inconveniently walks into your life. And you think, well, really? I was just getting on to enjoying myself, and now I've got to think about all of this emotional stuff. I think that's
and I have to compromise.
Yeah, but that's the sign of the start of a healthy relationship, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I have an online program for single people, and the first module is about being happy single. It's
there you
just,
go.
You know, it's the foundation. Without that, it's not going to happen. Okay, so what would be your tips for a successful marriage, apart from the communication things? Would there be something else?
Honesty, definitely. Yeah. And I think also, you know, just when you love somebody, you know, what love really is consideration for them as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it's about being open with your communication and being honest, but it's also about, you know, picking your timing to talk about things. Don't just hit them with something when it occurs to you.
And be constructive.
Yeah, but I think timing is really critical, especially, you know, I'm very much, I've got a lot of female energy. I kind of flip around and I'm quite creative in that way. And Mike is your typical, he's got very masculine energy. He's very linear, A to B. Mm-hmm. So if I come up with something that emotionally I want to offload onto him because I feel like it will help me, I've got to be considerate as to where he's at and what he's doing at the time and what his focus is. Because if I try and offload something onto him when he's focused on a particular task or his head's not in the game, then it can catch him off guard, and his reaction is then not always that helpful. Yeah. So I think it's about it's about being a little bit intelligent about when you raise certain things, and particularly if it's a relationship issue that you want to discuss and it's pertinent to them and they're going to have a reaction to it, and you know that, then you need to be so careful about the words that you choose, about when you talk about it, even saying to them, there's something I want to talk to you about. Can we have a bit of time tomorrow when we're both in at home to talk about this stuff? And then you're not catching them on the hop, you're not catching them off guard, and they know there's something coming that they can prepare themselves for, and you have the time to really think about the message that you're going to put across. And I think how you manage those conversations, even though you're one and you can be completely honest with each other, you still have to be considerate of the other's state of mind and where they're at.
Yeah, and I think another thing as well is, finding another human being that you're going to A, love, B, fancy, C, get on with, D, have to live with, which can't be easy. You've got to, there's so much to appreciate when you do find that person, because two human beings living together with different habits, different this, different that, it's quite difficult.
Well, do you know what, though? I think the concept is quite difficult, but for me, the reality is actually very easy.
Because you're well suited.
Yeah, we're well suited. And I think, that my whole philosophy, when you marry, you go from being two people to one entity. And it's no longer about me, myself, and I. It is about us and we and he. And therefore, the way that you think is different. The way that you behave is different. And I think sometimes when people start to drift apart, it's because they stop considering the other person. They stop seeing themselves as one, and they start to pursue their own thing. Actually, there's a really good example there in that I've really changed direction quite significantly over the course of the last 5 years. And the only reason that I've been able to do that, and that I've actually been confident enough, but also had the capacity to do it financially and emotionally, is because Mike's been supportive.
Yeah.
And I've had to say to him, look, this is something that I'm feeling, this is something that I want, this is something I desire, but rather than just therefore I'm going to, it's been, so what do you think about that?
Yeah.
And that's the difference, I think, between a successful relationship and one that's going to end up drifting apart.
Yeah, and it is not just putting your foot down, this is what I'm doing, but how do you feel about it? And, if he, for instance, was finding it difficult, finding a way so that you can get your own way, both of you sort of thing, so that both desires are fulfilled.
Yeah, sometimes it is about compromise. And I know that in today's society that's a little bit unpopular. We all think we should all be able to have what we want all the time, but actually relationships don't work that way.
No.
It's give and take, and you can't just take all the time. You have to be able to give as well. So I think that's quite a critical thing, is being able to compromise. And I think it might be a little bit unpopular, but I do think that there is an issue kind of in society at the moment that sees marriage as quite a throwaway construct,
disposable.
And because of my faith, I don't see that as an option.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it is a given, and there's an extra dimension in my relationship, which is God, and it's a triangle. Yeah. So actually, that changes my perception of marriage as well, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And from people that I've talked to, when I've explained how that impacts on my relationship and stuff, they acknowledge that it is different to their relationships. So I do think, marriage as a concept, comes from a faith background. It's something that, wherever you get to in history, whatever faith you have, there's always been this kind of notion of two people coming together and committing for life. And so I really subscribe to that as a Christian. Mike's not a Christian, but he was brought up by parents who were raised by, Christians, and they had that same traditional approach to marriage. Yeah. So he and I are quite matched in that respect, and I think that really helps as well.
He just chooses not to practice, as it were, which is fair enough,
Yeah, well, no, he doesn't have a faith. But it's just a tradition. In their family, when you get married, you stay married, and it comes from a long line of people that stay married. Yeah. And I come from a line of, although my mum's parents sadly divorced as a result of stuff that happened in that relationship, they're the only ones in my background that have ever experienced divorce, and my parents are still married. And I do think that your experience of marriage when you grow up really flavours the way that you perceive it as an adult. And so I think we're both quite fortunate that our parents are together, both celebrated their ruby wedding anniversaries,
Yeah, I've seen people who've come from divorce background that actually, with no faith or nothing like that, but they've actually been even more determined to get married and make it work because they didn't want that broken background, not only for themselves, but obviously for the kids when it happened. So you can be a bit of both, sort of thing.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, and not for a second am I suggesting
no.
You know, family, that's where you'll go. But I think if you've understood and you've taken on board how and why that happened, and you've moved on emotionally from that, then it doesn't stop you having healthy marriages yourself. Absolutely, yeah, I'm with you on that.
And if someone was struggling in their marriage right now, what would you say to them?
I'd say, first of all, get some help from somewhere, from someone, but pick who you talk to wisely, because things can easily turn into gossiping and kind of being a little bit unhelpful. Especially, you know, don't talk to mutual friends about it.
Yeah, I was just about to say it. I think the other issue is sometimes you need to, and I'm not plugging myself here, but quite generally, you need to talk to a professional, because if you speak to friends, people you know, or whoever, colleagues, they all have an opinion. You don't want their opinion. You don't want their experience. You need someone who is completely unbiased.
I mean, I think it depends on the kind of person that you are. I definitely agree. There's a point at which going to a complete outsider who understands more about the dynamics of relationships is a really valuable thing. I think if you're getting to that point in a relationship where you feel drifting apart and you're worried about what to do, and you may even have talked about it as a couple, but I think, my first thing is talk about it together. You know, it's communication is the fundamental, trust and communication. So if you can trust one another to actually talk about the problems, you may well find that you can resolve them quite easily. And if you can't, then together you can go and get help. If it's gone beyond that point where any conversation is just turning into an argument and it's become completely destructive, then I think as an individual, it's worth going and talking to a professional, like you say, who's going to give you an unbiased viewpoint, but also who's going to give you the right advice as to how you can actually repair the situation, rather than saying, oh, well, can't believe he did that. That's completely unacceptable. We should bin him. You know, you don't need those kinds of input when you're trying to fix a relationship.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes the outcome is that, but sometimes it isn't. But one of the things that the aggrieved party, for one of the better terms, need to also understand, they also need to understand that they've played a part. You know, it's not just happened because the other person's evil, as it were. And it's also understanding why the other person is acting as they are and where they're coming from, as opposed to all being me. But
I mean, I can't imagine. I'm sorry, I can't. I mean, it's difficult for me to really put myself in the shoes of somebody who's having to really cope with a massive betrayal, for example. And you know, we've had that in our family past. And I think sometimes you can't move past it, because even though you've tried to put yourself in their shoes and you've tried to understand where they're coming from, there really isn't enough of an explanation. It is just lust or whatever has got the better of that person, and I think when that's happened, it is more of a sign of what's gone on in their head. But if you as the other party can honestly say, I've looked inward and I can't find a particular thing that I've done or that I've said, if you really can't find that within yourself, that must be incredibly hard. But I do think stopping and looking at what your part to play is, even if it's not a serious issue within the relationship and it's just a hiccup that you're having, I think being willing to look at yourself and the part that you've played is really important in moving past that and actually making positive progress.
And I think the other thing as well is that, you know, the issues normally start with details. It's not always, you know, a massive thing that happens. It's normally lots of small details, one after the other, that lead to the big things.
Yeah, I think, as I said, trust and communication. And if you stop trusting one another, you start keeping things to yourself, you start making decisions by yourself, and it upsets the other person because they feel that they've been betrayed in a small way, that they've been betrayed. And once you start that pattern of behaviour, unless you do something about it and you recognise it, then it's a slippery slope, I think.
Okay, so just one last question. Is there anything you would have done differently?
No,
not
at all. I think the course of life is completely unpredictable, and you've got to take the rough with the smooth to you never know what's going to happen. And I think that's part of the thrill of it. It's whatever life throws at us, highs and lows, we know we're going to be together. And in the very, very beginning, when Mike was trying to think about, is this a relationship that I really want to be in or not, at that point I was really quite freaked out, and I was, it really affected me. But I would go through that a million times over to be able to still hear where I am. So no, I wouldn't do anything differently. We've been really happy. We've been really fortunate and blessed. We've got 2 beautiful children. I couldn't really ask for more. I'm very, very fortunate.
Fair enough. Okay, well, thank you so much for your time. And if you've enjoyed listening to this, then there will be more next week. Thank you very much. Have a good week.